My daughter-in-law Kelsey stood at the podium preaching about legacy. She wore my husband's watch, the one he promised our grandson. $500,000 vanished, my name erased, and her smile, unbothered. I didn't clap, I hit record. She thought I was just the widow in the corner seat, but I wasn't grieving anymore. I was building a case. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The flute of champagne sparkled in her hand as she smiled out at the room of mourners and catered sympathy. To George, Kelsey cooed, lifting her glass with manufactured reverence, a generous man, a devoted father, and a patient husband. And to Patricia, who, let's be honest, probably won't be far behind him. A ripple of uncomfortable laughter broke across the reception like cracked glass. I didn't move, just folded my hands over my lap, counted to 3, and memorized every syllable. She was 38, always had an opinion about my salt intake, and had made a habit of calling my memory delicate ever since my stroke 2 years ago. But there was nothing delicate about what I felt in that moment. It was sharp and clean, like a scalpel pressed beneath the ribs. The parlor buzzed around me, polite murmurs, the soft clink of forks tapping porcelain plates, the occasional sniffle or cough. My son Brian stood near the buffet, trying to look busy with a glass of something he wasn't drinking. He looked at Kelsey like he'd just bitten into something sour, but he said nothing. As always, she worked the room like it owed her something. Tight black dress, diamond necklace. Her heels clicked like gavel strikes on the hardwood floor. Grief, for me, sat differently. It had weight. It pressed into my chest with every breath, not just from losing George, but from the quiet, gnawing realization that she thought she'd already won. We hadn't even read the will yet. That's what made her confidence unsettling. She smiled like someone who'd already seen the last page of the book. I wondered just how involved she'd been in rewriting it. Later that evening, after the last sympathy card was tucked behind a floral arrangement and the final casserole dish was claimed from the fridge, I walked upstairs. My knees ached, but I didn't stop. I needed the quiet, and something else, though I didn't know what until I found it. George's study was exactly how he'd left it. One of his old cardigans hung over the back of his chair. His glasses were folded neatly beside the lamp. The dust hadn't gathered yet. He'd been in here recently, maybe even the day before he collapsed. I opened the drawer of his desk, the one he always said was just for taxes and junk. Inside, tucked between an old magnifying glass and a leather-bound ledger, was a navy folder labeled in his handwriting, "Private, do not share with Kelsey." The cap-locked warning might have made me laugh if my throat hadn't gone dry. George was direct in life, when he felt brave enough, but he was never careless. If he'd hidden something, it mattered. I sat down slowly, the chair still warm with memory, and opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets, bank login instructions, and a single sticky note with my name in bold ink. If anything happens to me, follow her name, start with the house. The heat left my body like someone had opened a window. Not from fear, from clarity. I'd played the role of grieving widow with grace, but grief was already curling into something leaner, sharper, something that doesn't ask to be comforted. I closed the folder and looked up at the wall of framed photos. Our wedding, Brian's graduation, George laughing at something I no longer remembered. Then I looked toward the laptop he'd kept on the corner of his desk. Open. Waiting. I carried it to the dining table, sat in the same chair I'd occupied the day we signed our first mortgage, and opened the flap with shaking hands. Inside, color-coded spreadsheets. A printed screenshot of his bank's login page with little notes in pen, password hints only I would understand. Beneath it all, a single sheet of lined paper folded once down the middle. My name at the top. Pat, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Follow her name. She'll be on more than one thing. Start with anything we made joint last year. And trust your gut this time. G. The last line struck something hot and sad in me. Because I hadn't trusted my gut, not about Kelsey, not about how George kept brushing off my concerns. I skimmed the spreadsheets, several entries highlighted in yellow, a column titled LLC Contributions, and then a number I hadn't seen before, $62,000 transferred in March of last year to something called Whitaker Collaborative Ventures. I sank back in my chair. That was right after my stroke, when I was spending nights foggy from medication and trying to remember how to brush my teeth in the right order. I remembered her then. Kelsey, sitting next to George at the breakfast nook, tapping her iPad while talking about pooled assets and passive income. George's voice from months ago echoed in my ears like it had been recorded on tape. She's just trying to help the family, Pat. She's trying to build something for Brian, for Emma. What she'd built was a foundation under my husband's name, and what she'd taken was likely mine. I made the call to George's estate attorney the next morning. His name was Carl Donnelly. Dry voice, slower than molasses, but competent. I'd only met him twice, once when George retired, and again when we updated our joint wills 20 years ago. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, surprised. "I'm very sorry again for your loss. What can I help you with?" I told him I had concerns about certain accounts George had handled with Kelsey in recent years. "There may have been a shift in ownership, a quiet one," I added. He grew cautious. "Do you have any documentation?" "I have a folder, George's folder, and it specifically says not to share it with your favorite client, Kelsey." There was a pause. Then the shuffle of papers on his end. "Give me an hour. I'll start checking the accounts listed under the estate." 1 hour turned into 3. During that time, I drank lukewarm coffee and sat with the folder spread across my living room like a crime scene. My grief was now laced with strategy. I didn't need to cry. I needed to calculate. Then came the knock. I opened the door to find Kelsey standing there with a box of gluten-free muffins, smiling like she belonged there. "I thought I'd stop by, see how you're holding up." I didn't invite her in, just leaned on the frame and stared. "You know, you should really consider selling this place," she said, peering past me. "It's a lot for one person. I mean, Brian and I could help manage the transition." She set the muffins on the porch railing. "I just want what's best for the family. We all do." Her tone was sugar-coated arsenic. I nodded slowly, holding eye contact. "Thanks, Kelsey. I'll let you know when I'm taking family advice from predators in heels." She blinked, a crack in the veneer. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed in my cardigan pocket. I turned away, leaving her standing there with her mouth half open and her muffins untouched. It was Carl. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said, voice tighter now. "I just checked the 2 asset accounts George opened last year. Kelsey's name is on both of them, but legally it shouldn't be. She wasn't listed as a beneficiary or a co-signer in the estate plan. Something's very wrong." The next day, I visited the attorney's office. The legal pad in front of me looked more like a battlefield than a briefing. Highlighter streaks, red circles, arrows stabbing across the margins. Carl, the estate attorney, slid another printout toward me with latex-gloved fingers like we were handling something radioactive. She added herself as a manager to George's business account 2 weeks before he passed, he said grimly. "While he was still alive?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. The timestamp was right there, 4:42 p.m. Thursday. George had been in the hospital that day, barely lucid from the pain meds. Carl nodded. She used his login, changed the recovery email, and set up dual access. "It's legally gray. Looks like consent unless contested." "And we're contesting," I said, gripping the edge of the desk. I stared at the signature line. It wasn't even George's handwriting. It was too neat, too practiced. And even if it was his, I knew Kelsey had coached it. The woman had a talent for smiling while stabbing. "Do you know if Brian was aware of any of this?" Carl asked. I hesitated. Brian had stopped by 2 nights ago. Grief clung to him like fog, thick and quiet, but not directionless. He sat on the porch swing, tapping his fingers like he used to on piano keys as a boy. "I don't know what's happening," he said. "She handles all of it, the bills, the investments. I figured, after your stroke and with Dad declining, it was just easier to let her manage it." "Manage it," I'd repeated, biting back a laugh. "That's one way to describe theft with access." He looked wounded. "I didn't mean—" "I know," I cut in. "But someday soon, You'll have to decide whether you're married to her actions or just the woman." Now, sitting across from Carl, I repeated what Brian told me. Carl raised an eyebrow, made a note. "She's smart," he muttered. "Manipulative, but smart." She was more than that. She was calculated. I could still hear the echoes of a long-forgotten argument in the kitchen from 6 months ago. George had come in after another visit with their accountant. I'd asked again if he'd updated the will like we'd agreed on. "I will, Pat," he'd said, loosening his tie. "I just need some time. It's not urgent." "Not urgent?" I snapped. "You're in and out of appointments. I've had a stroke. Our assets are tied to people who think you're soft." His voice dropped. "Kelsey's not trying to steal from us." "No, George," I said, putting down my glass of water with a shake. "She's trying to inherit early." He didn't answer. That silence said more than any argument could have. Back in the present, I left Carl's office and drove straight home, heart pounding like a slow drum. I didn't want this to be true, but the paper trail was turning into a roadmap, and Kelsey was always at the end of it. I spent the next 4 hours at my kitchen table pulling old manila folders from our home filing cabinet, pension statements, insurance summaries, tax returns. Every year, every signature, every scribbled note George had left in the margins. I flagged inconsistencies, made a checklist, underlined any document where Kelsey's name appeared. She had a way of showing up like mildew, slow, silent, until something started to rot. The next morning, I made one more call, this time to a forensic accountant recommended by Carl. Her name was Reena Singh. She had a no-nonsense tone and asked for digital copies of everything before our meeting. By 7 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message. "Reena S. You'll want to see this in person." The spreadsheet looked innocent at first, rows and columns, numbers in black, dates in gray. But the red flags didn't come in color. They came in patterns. "Here," Reena said, tapping her pen on the screen. "This is where the pension fund starts bleeding." I leaned in, the glow of her laptop lighting up the clean office like an interrogation lamp. It smelled like eucalyptus tea and toner ink, somewhere between calm and litigation. Over $80,000, transferred in 5 chunks, each labeled LLC contribution. Each one routed to an account with a bland name, Whitaker Family Revitalization Fund, LLC. "Revitalization," I repeated, my voice flat. "It's a real LLC, filed last year, registered by one Kelsey, Ann Whitaker. She's listed as the sole manager and authorized signer." I swallowed back the bitter taste of bile. "And my name?" "Nowhere," Reena replied. "My name, erased, like chalk in a storm." The earliest transfer dated back to March of last year. I was in a rehab center in New Hope, relearning how to write my own name without trembling. Kelsey must have been hovering over George like a vulture while I was struggling to sip soup without a bib. Reena slid a hard copy of the transfers toward me. I stared at the page like it was a death certificate. "I've flagged everything. You can take this to the bank, and if they push back, you've got legal standing, especially if you request a forensic freeze." I tucked the folder under my arm like a shield. "Thank you." The bank had the nerve to smell like cinnamon that day. I walked in with the same black coat I wore to George's memorial and waited while some intern in a pinstripe vest offered me a smile too wide to be real. When the branch manager arrived, thin tie, thinning hair, nervous fingers, I introduced myself and asked to speak privately. I handed over the folder. He skimmed the top page, then raised his eyebrows. "I'll need to verify—" "You'll need to freeze the account," I interrupted, "before more funds disappear. Or would you prefer my attorney explain that part?" The change in his posture was immediate. The manager stood up straighter, cleared his throat, and nodded like we were suddenly speaking the same language, liability. He returned 10 minutes later with a printout and a form labeled, "Account Freeze, Internal Review Pending." I signed it with a hand steadier than it had been in a year. Driving home, the cold seemed to seep into my bones, but I kept the heat off. I wanted to feel the sting. I wanted it to burn. At a red light, my phone buzzed in the passenger seat. Alert, eBay, listing notification for vintage men's gold timepiece, estate collection. My heart punched against my ribs. George's watches. Every year on his birthday, I'd give him one. A tradition we started before we had kids, before the house, before strokes and LLCs and betrayal. I clicked the link and saw them. His 1956 Omega Seamaster, his Hamilton Ventura, his Belova Accutron, the one he wore the night he proposed, laid out on cheap velvet with a description that read, "Gently pre-owned, no sentimental value." Kelsey just listed George's antique watch collection online for sale. I pulled over. For the first time since the funeral, I let out a noise that wasn't quite a sob. It was something deeper, a war cry with no sound. Kelsey thought I'd sit still. That's what most predators assume about widows. They mistake shock for surrender. But some of us bury our husbands and sharpen our knives in the same week. I set up the account under the name Grace Whitaker. It sounded dignified, harmless, entirely forgettable. Just another upscale bidder on heritagevest.com. No bio, no social media links, no reason to raise a red flag. The listings hit the site early that morning, and right there, under estate clearance luxury timepieces, was George's prized 1947 Hamilton chronograph. The same one he wore on our honeymoon, the same one he said he'd pass to our grandson once Brian got around to parenting. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I placed my first bid, and my second, and my 10th. Each time another bidder challenged me, I responded fast and high, escalating the price, turning the listing into a sinkhole. By noon, Grace Whitaker was the proud and fake owner of George's watch for $3,100. I never intended to pay. I intended to trap her. I used the site's reporting feature, uploaded my marriage certificate, and flagged the watch as stolen estate property. The auction house froze her seller profile within 6 hours. Not a word from them since, but I knew the damage was done. That night, while steeping mint tea, I sat at the kitchen island and opened George's financial archive folder again. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for anymore, but I found it under Home Improvements, 2023, a $16,800 invoice for office renovation, design build services, paid in full. The source? George's death benefit account. Date? 5 weeks after the funeral. I closed the folder slowly, knuckles pale against the leather-bound edge. The next morning, Brian stopped by unannounced. He looked rumpled, like he'd barely slept. Maybe he hadn't. "She said everything was legal," he murmured, hovering near the back door, "that she was sorting through junk to help you." "Did my husband's belongings feel like junk to you?" I asked. He shook his head, quiet. I slid the renovation invoice across the counter. "What's this?" "Her new workspace," I said evenly. "Bought with your father's death benefit." Brian read the line items, built-in cabinetry, matte brass fixtures, ergonomic desk, and winced. "I didn't know," he said. I met his gaze. "That's the problem, Brian. You never do." Later that afternoon, I found myself in George's upstairs closet, organizing what Kelsey hadn't yet pawed through. There, behind a box of cufflinks, sat a small black voice recorder, one of the old ones George used for meetings before he trusted smartphones. I pressed play. His voice, fragile but lucid, filled the quiet. "If anything happens to me, don't let them push you out, Pat. This house is yours. The memories are yours. Don't let them rewrite that." I listened to it again. Twice. 3 times. Not because I needed the reminder, but because I wanted to hear that last defiant edge in his voice. The man I loved still had fight in him, and now, so did I. The next day, while hunting for our old tax return copies, I pulled out the bottom drawer of the file cabinet and noticed a slightly warped folder wedged behind the back panel. Cream-colored, labeled in George's handwriting, "Draft, Patricia only." I opened it, breath tight in my throat. Inside was a typed will, dated just 6 months before his death. No signature, but every clause pointed to me. The house, the pensions, the antique car. There was no mention of Kelsey, no LLC, no shared anything. Every penny, every acre, every item was meant for me. The front doorbell rang, slicing through the moment like a blade. I tucked the folder under my arm and answered. Michael, my estate attorney, stood on the porch, briefcase in hand. "I brought the freeze documents for your review," he said, "but you look like you've seen a ghost." "I found this." I handed him the folder. He flipped through it quickly, then again, slower. His lips parted just slightly. "This changes everything," he muttered. "If we can prove undue influence—" I didn't hesitate. "Let's prove it." Michael, my attorney, set a crisp stack of documents on the table between us. "Lorazepam, hydrocodone, atenolol," he read. He was taking them daily, heavily sedated. I stared at the list. I remembered the pill organizer Kelsey insisted on managing. "He gets confused sometimes," she used to say, half laughing, half judging. Now I saw what she was really doing. Confusion wasn't a side effect. It was the goal. Michael pointed to a highlighted date. She submitted the power of attorney form while he was on the maximum dosage. The same week, she registered a new LLC in his name and moved assets. That's not caregiving. That's manipulation. I felt my pulse thrum in my neck. "So we have a window, a pattern." He nodded. "Enough to begin a case for undue influence. We just need more direct proof." That night, I went through George's old keepsake box, the one he kept tucked behind the furnace. Inside was an old phone, a flip phone, dead but intact. Brian sat across from me at the kitchen table, rubbing his temple. "He used that thing only when he didn't want Kelsey in his business." I charged it. When it powered on, it had 2 voicemails saved. The first one gutted me. Kelsey's voice, sharp and low. "George, come on. Just sign it. If you wait, she'll forget again. You want this to be clean, don't you? You said you'd transfer control." My husband's voice was faint, barely above a whisper. "I don't know, Kelsey. She's already worried." "She's confused," Kelsey snapped. "You said so yourself. Let me take care of it." I paused the recording. My fingers trembled. Brian sat frozen. "She made it sound like you were gone," he said, "like you couldn't manage anything." "She was managing him," I said, "until he had nothing left." We took the recording to Michael the next morning. "This," he said almost reverently, "is the linchpin." We matched the date of the voicemail to the prescription records. The pattern lined up perfectly. While George was on the strongest dosage, Kelsey was pushing paperwork, changing accounts, and quietly burying me under legal filings I never saw. I thought of the argument George and I had 1 month before he died. I'd found a printed form left out on the kitchen table. "You're transferring property?" I'd asked. She said it's just a precaution. "She also said you forgot to eat lunch." "You didn't. I made it for you." He looked tired then, more worn down than usual. "It's all temporary." No, it wasn't. Now we were building a legal case around what was never meant to be seen, a coordinated effort by Kelsey to shift power under the cover of caregiving. The strategy was working, until now. Later that week, I sat on the porch with a warm mug and a blanket across my knees, watching the breeze turn the oak leaves. For a brief moment, I allowed myself a rare emotion, hope. Then the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Kelsey standing there in a designer coat, holding a box of herbal tea and a saccharine smile. "I thought we could talk," she said. "This tension isn't good for you. Maybe you're overwhelmed." I didn't invite her in. She took a step closer. Her smile faltered. "You're getting too involved, Patricia. For your own good. Stop digging." I tilted my head. Was that a threat or a suggestion? "It's advice." She turned and left without another word. I watched her walk away, but my fear didn't follow her, because now I had the truth, and her voice, on record. The invitation arrived tucked beneath my doormat, printed on monogrammed stationery in a blush-pink envelope. Just one line. "Let's not make this harder than it has to be. Tea at 4. Kelsey." I nearly laughed, but I didn't. At 3:58, I arrived at her kitchen table dressed in a slate-gray cardigan and pearls, widow's armor. She greeted me with her usual cinematic smile, bright as a news anchor's. The table was set like a boutique hotel breakfast, china cups, scones, lemon wedges cut to symmetrical perfection. "You look well," she said, pouring tea into my cup like I was some visiting dowager, not the woman she'd tried to erase from her late father-in-law's life. "I drink a lot of water," I replied, and met her eyes. Kelsey wrapped both hands around her cup. I'm worried about you, Pat. All this stress, court documents, hearings, you've been through so much. I have, I said, slipping my hand into my coat pocket and pressing record on the small digital device I'd brought with me. She leaned in. You don't want this dragging out, do you? The lawyers, the estate investigators, they make things uglier than they need to be, for everyone. For everyone. Not for George, not for me. For everyone who might get caught in the web, she spun. I took a long sip. The tea was Earl Grey, oversteeped and lukewarm. Fitting. I'm not dragging anything out, I said sweetly. I'm just cleaning up what was left behind. She smiled tightly. George wouldn't have wanted this. I tilted my head. Are we speaking for the dead now? A flash of something darker passed through her expression. You're not young, Pat. Stress like this? It breaks people. It was a threat dressed in manners, wrapped in chamomile steam, but I'd heard louder men try to talk me down in this life, and I'd outlived them all. Then we should keep things simple, I said, placing my cup back onto the saucer with a soft click. For everyone's health. That night, I uploaded the audio file and sent it to Michael. His reply was immediate. Exactly what we needed. It shows intent, tone, and manipulation. Beautifully done. By Friday, a probate investigator had joined our team, a serious woman named Amelia Shaw, mid-40s, blunt bob, and legal pads full of red tabs. She's smart, Michael whispered after their first meeting, the kind who sees lies in font choices. Amelia began combing through every document tied to George's estate. While she worked, I filed a formal challenge to Kelsey's authority over the inheritance, citing undue influence and suspicious financial activity. Kelsey tried to get ahead of it with a carefully curated social media post. Caring for George was the greatest honor of my life. We all miss him terribly. Please respect our family's privacy. She even included a black and white photo of him from 10 years ago, long before the medications, long before the manipulation. A fiction painted in nostalgia. But something shifted that week. Brian called. Said he found a USB drive in one of George's old coat pockets. It had nothing labeled, just scanned PDFs, mostly insurance forms. But one document stood out. A second power of attorney, signed, dated, time-stamped during the week George was hospitalized, barely conscious. Amelia got the hospital records. He was on morphine around the clock, she said, holding the form delicately with gloved fingers. This shouldn't have even been possible, let alone legal. She looked up at me. If we verify this signature was signed under sedation, we can invalidate everything that came after it. I didn't speak. I didn't have to, because in that moment, the tide turned. The courtroom wasn't full yet, but the weight of truth already pressed into the oak panels and worn carpeting. The air smelled like lemon-scented cleaner and something older, dust and consequence. I held the forged power of attorney document in my gloved hands, its pen strokes slightly shaky, its signature dated during the week George could barely recognize his own name. He wouldn't have known what year it was, I murmured to Michael, who sat beside me, flipping through case files. He nodded. This isn't just morally wrong, it's legally vulnerable. This is how we get the door open for reversal. Probate court accepted the filing the following day, and just like that, it was no longer just a family feud. It was a case. Kelsey must have sensed the shift, because hours after we received the hearing confirmation, she posted a glossy black-and-white photo of George on Facebook, him laughing, squinting in the sun from a trip we took to the shore 20 years ago. Her caption read, "He was my heart. Caring for him during his final year was a sacred duty, even when others didn't understand. Elder care. Love in grief." The comments poured in like syrup. "So strong, Kelsey. He was lucky to have you. Ignore the noise, Queen." But I was the noise now. And I was just getting louder. The next morning, I printed out a letter I'd been working on since the funeral. I addressed it to the Havertown Sentinel and dropped it in the editor's mailbox myself. No email, no digital trail, just paper and ink and my own trembling truth. It ran the following Sunday under the title, Widow, not a witness, my husband deserved better. In it, I didn't name names, I didn't accuse. I told the story of watching a man I loved slowly disappear, first from illness, then from paperwork. I talked about the hidden ways power gets transferred while no one's looking. I ended with a line George used to say when he tucked our checkbook into the drawer: "Protect the home, protect the heart." The piece went viral, at least in our town's definition of viral. Shared on local Facebook groups, reposted by neighbors. I saw copies taped to bulletin boards in grocery stores and folded into church bulletins. Then came Kelsey's reply, a rambling Instagram story filmed from her car, eyes wide, voice pitched too high. "I just think it's so disgusting when people twist grief into performance," she snapped. "Like, if I'm such a villain, where was she when he needed help with his meds? Oh, right, still recovering from her stroke." The mask slipped, and this time, everyone saw. Brian called that night. His voice was low, uneven. "Mom, I think I need to see everything, like, all of it." So I did. I showed him the bank records, the medical charts, the emails she sent under his name. He sat silently for a long time. "She made me feel like questioning her was disloyal," he finally said. "I didn't know how far it went." He looked wrecked, like someone who'd found rot in his foundation. "She planned this," I told him, "not after George died, long before." We were gaining ground, which is why I wasn't surprised when a manila envelope arrived on my porch with no return address. Inside, a single-page legal document, temporary restraining order, filed by Kelsey Whitaker. Claim, ongoing emotional harassment and property intimidation. No witnesses, no substance, just tactics, delay, distraction. Michael read it and exhaled hard. "She's trying to flip the optics before the hearing. We'll squash it." But as I stared at the stamped seal, I knew this wasn't her endgame. It was a smokescreen, and behind it, she was planning her next move. The courtroom buzzed with whispers until the bailiff's gavel cracked the air like a bone snapping clean. I sat straight in my navy suit, pearls just tight enough to remind me not to tremble. The warmth from the coffee I hadn't touched had long faded, but my hands stayed wrapped around the paper cup like it was an anchor. Kelsey entered with forced confidence, a silk blouse tucked too neatly into high-waisted slacks, her hair pulled back in a sleek, punishing bun. She looked like she was auditioning to play a grieving widow. Too bad she was neither. Judge Emery gave a curt nod and motioned for the proceeding to begin. Kelsey's lawyer went first, an oily type with too perfect diction and too many dramatic pauses. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, turning to address the courtroom, "has grave concerns about the mental clarity and stability of Mrs. Patricia Whitaker. There is documented history of a stroke, memory lapses, and what can only be described as emotional volatility since her husband's death." Kelsey's lips quirked into a faux pitying smile as he spoke, like she was already rehearsing her acceptance speech for most misunderstood daughter-in-law. My lawyer, Michael, barely blinked. He stood and addressed the judge with the calm of a man who'd been here before. "We'll be addressing those claims today," he said, along with a comprehensive record of financial misappropriation, coercion, and attempted estate manipulation. The judge leaned forward. "Proceed." Brian was the first to take the stand. He fidgeted, hands twisting in his lap like he was trying to unscrew guilt from his fingers. "She kept me out of everything," he said, his voice catching. I thought she was helping. I didn't know she had Dad signing things when he couldn't even stand without help." Kelsey didn't meet his eyes. Her nails clicked against her phone, tucked into her lap just out of the judge's line of sight. Then came the audio. Michael played the clip from George's phone. Kelsey's voice, sharp and hurried. "Just sign it, George. She forgets things. We need this in case she does something irrational. You want us protected, don't you?" Gasps rippled through the courtroom like someone had opened a window midwinter. The judge raised one eyebrow. "That was your voice, Ms. Whitaker?" Kelsey straightened. "That recording is taken out of context. George and I were discussing family safety." Michael clicked a remote. The screen behind us lit up with the draft will, George's handwriting unmistakable, his signature blank. The header read, "Revised Will, Primary Beneficiary, Patricia. Ann Whitaker." I took the stand last. I didn't shake. I didn't shout. I told the story plainly, of love, illness, manipulation, and the quiet theft that tried to turn grief into erasure. When I finished, the room was silent. Not the kind of silence that waits, the kind that knows. Judge Emery adjusted her glasses. "Given the testimonies and evidence, I'm placing an immediate freeze on all estate transactions. Final judgment will be delivered pending a full audit." I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. But just as we were gathering our things, Kelsey turned to me, eyes flat and unreadable. "This isn't over," she whispered. "It never is with people like her." The judgment came on a Tuesday morning, gray and cold, as if the weather itself knew the verdict would come heavy. I sat in the same courtroom, same seat, same pearls that no longer felt like armor, just truth. Judge Emery didn't waste time. "This court finds sufficient evidence of undue influence, forgery, and fiduciary misconduct regarding the estate of George Whitaker," she said, voice flat and final like the closing of a vault. "Effective immediately, Kelsey Whitaker is removed from all roles associated with the estate. Power of attorney is returned to Patricia Whitaker." Kelsey didn't cry. She didn't shout. She sat frozen, blinking at nothing, like the news hadn't reached her skin yet. Her lawyer's lips tightened, likely calculating his unpaid invoice. I didn't smile. Victory wasn't sweet. It was sharp, like winter air in the lungs after too long underground. The judge continued, "A civil case regarding damages and misappropriation of funds will move forward pending review. Until such time, the estate is to be unfrozen and returned to the sole authority of Mrs. Whitaker." Behind me, Brian exhaled a sound that bordered on relief and apology. When the gavel dropped, it didn't echo. It landed. Outside the courthouse, reporters hovered like birds sensing a body, but I walked past them. Brian caught up, slowing his steps to mine. "Mom," he said, halting. I stopped but didn't turn. He tried again. I didn't know the half of it. I was blind. I faced him then. The wind caught his tie and pulled it sideways like it was tired of his excuses. "You'll have to earn it," I said, and that was all. The following week, the estate attorney met me with cautious reverence, as though I might dissolve if spoken to too loudly. He slid a file across the desk. "All assets, properties, pensions, liquid and tangible, are now legally in your name." I nodded. "And the trust?" "Kelsey has been removed," he confirmed. "Permanently." It should have felt like closure. Instead, it felt like an unblocking, like something dammed for too long had finally been allowed to flow again. But there was more. The civil case was filed the same afternoon. Bank records, itemized statements, and even Kelsey's own texts were now evidence of her greed and my resilience. She had siphoned thousands for vacations, home upgrades, and a consulting business that existed only on paper. Her name was polished, but her intentions were paper-thin. George's antique collection was returned under my claim of rightful ownership. Every carved watch, every monogrammed cufflink, relics not of wealth, but of love. I placed his war medal back on the mantel. The dust was still faint on the spot it used to rest. Later that night, I updated the foundation trust. Kelsey's name, gone. Her claim to anything, erased. Brian came by the next day, holding a grocery bag with store-bought muffins and that uncertain look sons wear when they're not sure if they're welcome. "I was weak," he admitted. "I let her do things. I thought staying quiet kept the peace." "There was no peace," I said, taking the muffins, but not the sentiment. "There was just silence." He nodded, eyes full of the kind of guilt that doesn't evaporate in one conversation. "Can I help fix it?" "Start by showing up," I said. "That's more than she ever did." But peace, like justice, is rarely absolute. That Friday, a cream envelope arrived by certified mail. No return address. Bank letterhead inside, "Dear Mrs. Patricia Whitaker, This notice is to confirm your liability status as the co-signer of mortgage file number 4892-87RM, attached to the Whitestone property under Whitaker Holdings, LLC. My heart dropped like a stone in deep water. I flipped to the attached form. My signature stared back, flawless, familiar. Except I'd never signed it. The bank's fraud division didn't blink when I called. The moment I said the word forgery, they transferred me to someone named Rhonda, who spoke like she'd handled hundreds of stories just like mine, except I wasn't dead and I wasn't staying quiet. "Mrs. Whitaker," Rhonda said gently, "I've reviewed the file. The signature on this mortgage application was submitted with a scanned copy of your license and proof of life insurance." She paused, then added carefully, "The license was reported lost 6 months ago." "I never lost it," I said. My voice was steady, but my fingers trembled slightly around the cordless phone. "I know exactly where it is, in my drawer, in my house." "Well, then someone else submitted it under your name." The line buzzed in my ear like static anger. "Let's escalate this," she said. "You're not liable if this is proven fraudulent." I already knew it was. My lawyer, Henry, filed identity theft charges within the week. His office smelled like paper and old leather, comforting, oddly enough, the kind of place where people still believed truth could be bound and notarized. "She used the equity as collateral," he said, showing me the breakdown of the funds. "It all went to a company called Eastbridge Strategies." "What is it?" I asked. "A consulting firm," he replied, "registered under her maiden name. No employees, no website, no invoices, no taxes filed." "So it wasn't a business, it was a laundering station." "I want to expose it," I said, "not just legally, publicly." Henry's lips curved into something between approval and warning. "That will draw attention." "I'm counting on it." A week later, I sat in a folding chair at a makeshift podcast studio downtown, speaking into a foam-covered mic in a church basement that smelled like coffee and mothballs. The host, Kara, was maybe 40, sharp and kind in equal measure. "We have a special guest today," she said, her voice smooth as ribbon. "Patricia Whitaker is here to talk about financial elder abuse and what she uncovered after her husband's passing." I cleared my throat. They said I was grieving, that I was fragile. But grief isn't fragility. It's clarity. It shows you who has their hand on your shoulder and who has their hand in your wallet. The interview lasted 38 minutes. By the time I got home, the podcast had been downloaded 11,000 times. By morning, it had doubled. And then the letters came. Not official ones, real ones. From women. A woman in Delaware whose daughter opened 5 credit cards in her name, a grandmother in Texas whose grandson sold her car while she was in physical therapy, a widow in Ohio who lost her pension to a family-run investment fund that never existed. "I thought I was crazy," one letter read, "until I heard you." I started writing the elder protection pamphlet that same night. What to do before you're targeted was the working title, but it would change. This wasn't just about defense, it was about retaliation. Brian called, voice tight. "She's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "She left this morning. House is empty, took everything but the dining table." I drove by to see for myself. The blinds hung crooked, like they were rushed. A garbage bag sat half-spilled on the porch, shredded papers, a broken coffee mug, an empty bottle of her favorite perfume. No forwarding address, no call, no apology. Inside, the house echoed with the kind of absence that only fraud could build. I walked the perimeter, looking not for Kelsey, but for proof of who she really was. Her life had always been about appearances, but now, even the mirrors were gone. The front porch light was still on when the sheriff knocked. From the street, the house looked warm and lived in, but inside it felt hollow, like someone had vacuumed out the soul. She'd vanished. No witnesses, no tire marks, not even a dog barking in the night, no Uber logs, no credit cards, no sign of panic, just absence. But I knew better. Ghosts don't disappear. They vanish on purpose. Rhonda from the bank called the next morning. Her voice was clipped, like she hadn't slept. We've frozen everything. Domestic, business, pension-linked. A pause. But one pinged our compliance radar. You'll want to sit down. I didn't sit. I just tightened the cord on my robe. Where? Luxembourg, opened 6 months ago under a false consulting firm. Nearly 500,000 routed there in 9 weeks. All cash withdrawals. 500,000. My lungs tightened. That was more than what had already been traced. She'd bled us faster than we'd realized. Can you lock it down? We've flagged it, but she knew the timing. This was choreographed. She always choreographs, I murmured, right down to the applause. That afternoon, I hired Jansen, ex-FBI, now a PI, with a face like a weathered statue and eyes that didn't blink unnecessarily. He met me on my porch, his trench coat already beading with rain. He didn't shake hands, just asked, "Where's the box?" I handed him the folder George had hidden, the one marked Kelsey, before it burned. "She's not just evading," he said, flipping open a leather-bound notebook. "She's exiting. Strategically, you don't just walk away from this kind of theft unless you have a shadow plan." "What do you need from me?" He didn't hesitate. "Everything she touched, emails, voicemails, birthday cards if you have them." He took the box without ceremony and disappeared into the drizzle. While he hunted her down, I made sure the story didn't die. I stood in front of senior centers and community halls across Pennsylvania, holding up my red leather folder like it was a war medal. Folding chairs, fluorescent lights, dry muffins. None of it mattered. What mattered was the line of women who waited afterward, not to question me, but to confess. A woman in a denim jacket once pulled me aside and said, "I thought it was just my son. You gave me the words I couldn't find." I went home exhausted, but no longer alone, and never defeated. 2 weeks later, Brian came by. No rehearsed apology this time, just a cardboard box of Kelsey's old files and a face full of ash. "I want to testify," he said, sitting on the edge of the couch. "Civil court. I don't want to be part of her shadow." "You already were," I said gently. He winced. "I know. She told me it was just tax stuff. That night. She said you'd agreed to it. But you didn't ask me." "I didn't want to," he whispered. "And that's worse." I didn't offer forgiveness, just handed him the original folder George had left behind, the one he'd labeled with shaky hands. "Private. Do not share with Kelsey. Start with that. The truth's heavier than it looks." Days passed. Then came the letter. Handwritten, no return address, ink smudged like it had wept. It was from Miranda, Kelsey's sister. "I should have spoken up sooner," it read. "But she started cutting us off around the time George got sick, said you were fragile, that you didn't want visitors. I believed her. God help me. If you need me to testify, I will." Her words smelled faintly of cinnamon gum and guilt. I pressed the paper to my cheek, not for comfort, but for clarity. That night, I dreamed of George. Not the hospital version, not the pale man in morphine silence, but the version in a cardigan, barefoot on our kitchen tile, dancing me in circles to Patsy Cline on a half-tuned radio. He laughed as he dipped me, a man still full of oxygen and defiance. I woke up at 3:17 a.m., cold, awake, furious. The next afternoon, my inbox lit up. Subject, visual confirmation from Jansen at KeystoneTracking.com. Attachment, IMG_3874.jpgg body spotted. Commercial Street, Portland, Maine. Staying near the marina. Will advise. I clicked. There she was. Kelsey. Standing under a slate-gray sky, paper coffee cup in hand, hair tousled by the harbor wind. Calm, casual. Like she hadn't stolen a legacy and disappeared into fog. Like she hadn't buried a man and tried to erase me right after. I didn't pack much, just a weekender bag, my red leather folder, and the ugly scarf George always hated, but I wore anyway when I needed a little extra armor. I drove straight through the night, the road ahead stretching like a long sigh. By sunrise, Maine had that cold, salt-scrubbed silence that felt both ancient and clean. Commercial Street buzzed with early foot traffic and gull cries, the marina breathing fog onto weather-worn docks. That's where I saw her, Kelsey, like she belonged. She leaned against a coffee kiosk, sipping from a biodegradable cup, wearing a blazer and oversized sunglasses like the con artist version of Jackie O. There was no disguise, no shame, just a woman who still believed she was untouchable. I didn't get out of the car, just watched her laugh at something the barista said, watched her toss her hair like it still held power, watched her exist like she hadn't stolen the second half of my life and tried to erase my name from it. I snapped 2 photos and sent them to Jansen. Confirmed Kelsey, Commercial Street, Portland, Marina Side. He replied within minutes. Nice work, stay out of sight moving in. He didn't disappoint. By the next morning, she was in custody. Picked up mid-speech during a financial literacy seminar. Her name tag said Allison Fry, and her presentation was titled, Leveraging Legacy, Building Wealth Across Generations. The irony nearly made me choke on my motel coffee. The charges hit fast: federal wire fraud, identity theft, elder exploitation, false business registration. Jansen told me she didn't even blink when they cuffed her, just straightened her blazer and asked for her lawyer. I didn't go to the arraignment. I sent my granddaughter. She walked into that courtroom with the poise of a woman 3 times her age, wearing one of my old jackets, gray wool with brass buttons, and read from a page I hadn't seen until later. She stole more than money. She stole dignity. But what my grandmother taught me is that dignity can't be held hostage. It returns when we take back our voice. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. The judge nodded, and Kelsey for once had nothing to say. When my granddaughter came home, she dropped the transcript in my lap and said, "We're done letting people narrate our pain." I reclaimed everything after that, quietly, precisely. The estate was renamed under the Whitaker Family Trust, my name, my bloodline, no strings or signatures forged in morphine fog. We combed through every record and erased her, not out of spite, out of survival. Then one afternoon, a note appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just a small white envelope with my name written in hard, looping script I recognized immediately. Inside, a single line, "You may have won." But he still chose me. My thumb trembled against the edge of the paper. The wind outside rustled the porch wind chimes, and for a second, I just stared at the handwriting. How dramatic the loops were, like someone trying too hard to be elegant. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I walked to the kitchen, made myself tea, and dropped the note into the flames of the gas stove. Let her think he chose her. Let her cling to that lie. Because I chose something else. The truth. And it had my name at the bottom of every single document she tried to rewrite. I found out about the video on a Thursday, just before the mail arrived. Jansen had called to tell me the final audit was complete. Every penny traced, every lie tagged. I thought the worst was behind me. But then I got the call from George's lawyer. "There's one more thing," she said. "He left a recording. For you." I didn't speak. Just nodded into the silence, forgetting she couldn't see me through the phone. That afternoon I sat in her office surrounded by mahogany shelves and the smell of printer ink and lemon oil. The screen lit up, and there he was, George. Sitting in his recliner in the old sunroom, light streaking across his face like a final blessing. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were clear. "If you're watching this," he began, "I probably didn't do enough while I was alive." He paused, swallowing. "I knew what Kelsey was doing. I knew she was isolating you, twisting things. I didn't know how far she'd go, and I should have spoken up sooner. But I want you to know something. Pat, this family only stayed whole because of you. Not her. You were the one holding the damn beams up." My hand went to my chest. "I didn't change the will in time," he continued, "but my intentions were clear. You were always the rightful heir. Not because of marriage, because of merit, because you protected what I was too weak to face." He smiled then, just a little, like he was half embarrassed. "I hope you outlive the hell out of me." The screen faded to black. That video became part of my speaking circuit. I didn't share it with the press, didn't upload it to the internet, But when I stood in front of clinics, senior centers, auditoriums filled with women holding broken trust documents and the names of distant children, I'd play it on a projector and say, "This is what accountability can look like, even if it arrives too late to say it to your face." They listened. And then they stood. I rewrote my will a week later. Not a cent to Kelsey. Instead, half to charity and the other half into a scholarship fund in George's name for students studying elder law. The kind of legal guardians who would know what red flags look like, not just what a signature means. Brian showed up the next day. I found him outside the community center where I'd just finished speaking. "I signed up to volunteer," he said almost shyly. Thought maybe it was time to stop apologizing and start participating. It wasn't redemption, but it was a start. My memoir came next. Grief Isn't Weakness, It's Strategy. The title came to me in a dream, or maybe just after one. I'd been standing on the edge of that metaphorical cliff Kelsey tried to push me off. Only this time, I built stairs down the side, picked up a rock, and climbed back up. The publisher offered me more than I expected. Enough to say yes, enough to close the house and pack the boxes. I sold the old place on Westbury Lane without fanfare. No staged furniture, no open house cookies. Just a quiet transfer, a set of keys left in a ceramic bowl, and one last walk through the echo of my old life. The coastal cottage I moved into was small but wide open to the sea. Wind rattled the windows, and the salt air bit at my skin every morning. It felt alive, honest, like nothing could sneak up on me here. I unpacked George's old mug, the one that said Captain of the Grill, and placed it beside the stove. Not because I needed it, just because it reminded me that even regretful men can leave behind something useful. The day I finished moving in, a package arrived. No return address. My name handwritten across the top in blue ink. Inside was a thick envelope, heavier than I expected. I pulled it out. The front was labeled, "From the prison desk of Kelsey J. Randall." My hands stilled. My breath caught. It wasn't over. Not yet. The pen didn't shake. It glided. Black ink flowed like resolution. The notary across from me blinked as I pushed the final page forward, initials crisp in every corner. "All done," she said, glancing at the documents. "You've officially secured the trust. Everything is in your name now." My name. Not borrowed, not overwritten. Mine. I left the office without fanfare, stepped out into salt-thick air and a wind sharp. Enough to tug memories from my sleeves. The marina below shimmered in winter light. The same spot where Jansen first spotted Kelsey weeks ago, bold, unbothered, unaware she was on the verge of collapse. She hadn't written since the prison letter. No calls, no appeals, just inked delusion between lined notebook pages, insisting George had chosen her. But if choice meant forgery, theft, manipulation, then yes, she was absolutely chosen. That night, my granddaughter surprised me with cake and candles in the cottage kitchen. Just the two of us, a single chocolate layer cake, frosting uneven and finger-swiped at the corner. She'd baked it herself. "Happy birthday, Grandma," she whispered, placing a daisy behind my ear. "To the strongest woman I know." I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't moved, but because strength by now was muscle memory. Later, when the kitchen had gone quiet and the candle wax hardened into shallow puddles, I climbed into bed with the prison diary unopened on the nightstand. I'd read it one day, but not yet. The next morning, I dressed in George's old flannel shirt, oversized, washed thin with age, and drove to the dock where we used to sit with coffee and arguments and retirement plans that never quite made it past the planning. The urn was lighter than I remembered, or maybe I'd just grown stronger. Seagulls wheeled above, and the ocean hissed like a secret between rocks. I unscrewed the lid, pulled in a lungful of wind. "You were a good man," I said, steady and soft, but not a perfect one. I spent too long confusing those things. I scattered the last of his ashes across the water, watched the gray plume drift like smoke from a fading fire. "I forgive you," I added. The dock creaked under my boots as I turned to leave, but the water behind me stayed still. Finally still. Brian called that afternoon. No promises, just conversation. We talked about bad timing and worse decisions, about fear, and how sometimes it hides inside people you trust. He admitted he'd started seeing a therapist, that he'd joined a support group for adult children of manipulative spouses. He didn't ask me to move on. He asked if we could begin again. Slowly, I said. Slow's fine, he replied. I'm not going anywhere this time. The kitchen in the cottage faced east, all morning sun and peeling shutters. I'd left one shelf empty on purpose. That night, I filled it. George's photo. The one where he's holding a fishing rod and grinning like a man who still believed love fixed everything. Beside it, a brass anchor figurine he gave me one anniversary, when we couldn't afford dinner out. And tucked behind them both, the folder that started it all, now sealed, labeled in my own handwriting, closed. I looked around at the quiet room. No ghosts, just echoes. Kelsey once said I'd follow him soon. She was right. I followed him into peace. Alone, but never powerless.